All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final keynote panel of the night. This one is titled Exposing and Shutting Down Fetal Tissue Trafficking. I am so lucky to be joined by some of the folks who have been on the ground on this issue, working to bring light to this issue and justice for the victims. I am joined first by David Daleiden, an investigative journalist who went undercover for 30 months to expose illegal activities of the abortion industry. He is also the creator of numerous videos currently under gag order, some released in 2015, that shocked the country and exposed the criminal activity of many facets of the abortion industry and how taxpayer dollars fund research using fetal organs harvested from born alive babies. David is the catalyst who caused Congress to do an investigation into the abortion industry and led to many states to defund Planned Parenthood. Next up is Robert Byrd, who is the executive coordinator of Pro-Life San Francisco, a non-sectarian and multi-partisan grassroots organization operating in the abortion training capital of America. Kristen Turner is the executive director of Pro-Life San Francisco, who, along with Robert, has been on the front lines in the fight against unethical fetal tissue research. She is also a progressive, atheist, vegan, feminist, and social justice activist from Northern California, as well as the communications director for the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising. All right, David, I think for a lot of us, it was your investigation, your initial investigation, that made us aware that fetal tissue harvesting and trafficking was something that was happening, let alone something that Planned Parenthood executives were using our tax dollars to get rich off of. So could you please just give us a brief introduction to what exactly we're talking about when we say, what is fetal tissue harvesting or fetal tissue trafficking?
Sure. When we're talking about fetal tissue harvesting and fetal tissue trafficking, we are talking about the harvesting of the body parts, the organs, and the cells of aborted human fetuses. The fresh harvesting and use of those biological materials for experiments. There are, sometimes you'll hear people talking about historic cell lines that were developed using aborted fetal tissue in the past. There's certainly many ethical concerns that people have about those and that we can talk about. But when we talk about fetal tissue harvesting and fetal tissue trafficking, we're actually talking about the fresh, contemporary, new sourcing of organs and body parts from aborted children that require more abortions to happen in order to continue to harvest fresh body parts from them.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Robert, I know that your work has been key in a lot of the discoveries that have been made, especially about practices at UCSF. For those of you who don't know, Robert is like the FOIA king. Robert, can you tell us a little bit about your work and how maybe people might be able to replicate it in their own communities?
Most definitely. So I've been working full-time with Pro-Life San Francisco since the summer of 2019. Later that year is when we publicly began our UCSF campaign. So the University of California, San Francisco is one of the medical schools within the UC system. They're overseen by a board of directors or board of regents that are essentially ignoring these atrocities that are occurring under their watch. And we have been able to make use of, since this is a public school, we've made use of the California Public Records Act in order to obtain as much more information as we can that isn't already available on the internet regarding aborted fetal tissue research.
Great, thank you. Next up, Kristen, I know you have organized a lot of demonstrations and campaigns against these practices. Can you talk a little bit about how you have gone about putting a spotlight on this issue, and why do you think agitating about this issue rather than just abortion generally is important?
First and foremost, I would say that our campaign is really split into two major categories. We have our macro campaign and our micro campaign, and recently breaking it up this way has really helped us in trying to achieve our goals. So obviously our macro campaign is to see the humanization of unborn children so that people won't feel the need to use them in these types of research projects. But in terms of our micro campaign, specifically for the past couple of months, Pro-Life San Francisco has been working really hard and doing demonstrations in order to get a meeting with the chancellor of UCSF, Samuel Hawgood. And we've spoken at the Regents these last couple months. We've done demonstrations at schools, and we've really ramped up not only the number of people, but the passion in this issue. And we think that that's really important. Obviously, we want fetal tissue research to stop. But that's kind of what we've been up to. It's really important to agitate on this issue because I think that it is a place where we can find common ground with people who don't necessarily agree with us on abortion itself. Because when we look at a lot of these children who are being exploited for research, many of them are in later gestational ages where pro-choice people wouldn't support abortion, or the methods in which they're killed and used for research are just so incredibly gruesome, they're able to actually see these people as human beings. And in my experience, when talking about fetal tissue research and organ harvesting with people, they tend to have a little bit more of an emotional response than my typical abortion debates, because we can say, here's the records, they said they were harvesting fetal genitals, something you wouldn't have if you were just a clump of cells. And so I think that it really stirs people's consciences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, David, I'd love to hear about the reaction that you have found to your work over the past few years. I know it's been quite mixed. You know, whether it's pro-life people looking at it, the pro-abortion politicians. Of course, people like Kamala Harris have not been fans of your work. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your some of the backlash you've received, as well as the response from the pro-life community.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that Kristen really hit the nail on the head with what she just said at the end of her last answer, which is, you know, which kind of encapsulates the whole reason that I decided that I wanted to start the Center for Medical Progress and do a 30-month-long in-depth investigative journalism study on the harvesting and trafficking of aborted children. And it's because ever since this issue first came across my radar about 12 years ago now, I've always thought that there's something particularly horrific, but also particularly clarifying about the issue of fetal trafficking. And it's because aborted children are only valuable for Planned Parenthood and other abortion clinics to sell, and for taxpayer-funded university researchers to purchase and experiment on, precisely because they're human beings just like us. You know, our friends at Pro-Life San Francisco and elsewhere, people who have followed their work and our work will be very familiar with the experiments that have to do with humanized mice, where they're taking an immunodeficient rodent and they're implanting the aborted organs, the organs and body parts from an aborted child inside the mouse or the rat to keep them growing. To use for different, you know, drug testing for big pharma companies and stuff like that. Just the name of that experimental model, right? A humanized mouse study. They don't want to just study on regular lab rats. They want to study on as human of lab rats as possible. And they need the body parts of aborted children in order to do that. So the body parts are only valuable to sell and experiment on and traffic precisely because they're human beings just like us. They don't want the little mouse body parts or the little puppy body parts or little frog body parts. They want little human baby body parts. And so it's an extra level of objectification beyond the original objectification of abortion that kills a child in abortion and then objectifies the baby again by saying this is an object, this is a commodity that we can buy and trade as if we have a right to somebody else's heart or somebody else's brain or somebody else's liver. And I think that is, and I've never been able to get over that paradox at the heart of it. But I've also, you know, I've been really convicted for a long time that, you know, if we're going to have a good faith, honest discussion about abortion policy and about how we treat pregnant people and children in the womb in this country, then we have to. I think we have to. We have to include a big room in that conversation to talk about the commodification and the commercialization of the body parts of unborn children. I think that is extra clarifying for the entire conversation. And overall, you know, I do have to say that for it's been 7 years now since I first began releasing the original undercover video reports about Planned Parenthood leadership's participation in the harvesting and trafficking of aborted fetuses. And still, even 7 years later, overwhelmingly, the response from the public, whether you're someone who is pro-life or pro-choice, or, you know, like most people, sort of, you know, kind of in the middle and uncomfortable and, you know, still kind of searching for answers on abortion, overwhelmingly, the response that me and my team get from the public is a positive response. And that has always been really motivating and something that I'm really thankful for, to see how thankful the public is for there to be a conversation and for there to be solid reporting on these issues. Really, the only negative reaction has come from the establishment elite that is allied with the abortion industry. It's come from the abortion industrial complex that we've all been learning much more about in the past couple of years, because Planned Parenthood and their allies have known from the very beginning. They even, you know, remarked about this when I and my team were undercover, and we would talk to them at some of their trade shows and their conferences. They were terrified of the facts about their participation in the harvesting and trafficking of aborted children becoming public and coming to light. It's even on some of the undercover clips that you can watch on YouTube still, where they talk about they're terrified of the, quote, the New York Times headline exposing them for harvesting and selling body parts of aborted children. So Planned Parenthood and their allies at the National Abortion Federation, their partners at major taxpayer-funded research universities, at the NIH, at for-profit companies like STEM Express, they're really the only ones who have been really upset and really outraged that that somebody was talking about and reporting on fetal trafficking, because they know that they always knew that it threatened their entire apparatus of industrial scale, state-sponsored, taxpayer-funded abortion. And we've started to see that come to pass. I think, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that for years before 2015, before CMP's undercover reporting, a lot of the sort of highest level national discussion of abortion would focus on these extremes, right? Of very late term abortion, partial birth abortion, or sort of very early medication abortion and embryonic stem cell research. But after, you know, the CMP's undercover footage really put a spotlight on what you would call the mid-trimester human fetus, right? The sort of late second trimester or mid second trimester child in the womb who maybe is not quite, quote unquote, viable according to the historic legal precedents, but is unmistakably human. And it was after our undercover reporting that the state of Mississippi and others began passing laws like the 15-week limit in Mississippi that is, you know, that asserted the people's interest in protecting our brothers and sisters in the womb who are recognizably human, just like us, old enough to be trafficked for body parts, sadly. And yet that Mississippi law cut to the heart of the obsolete old Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey Supreme Court precedents, and forced the United States Supreme Court to focus on the humanity of the so-called pre-viable child in the womb, which they had never done before. And because of that, Roe versus Wade has been consigned to the ash heap of history this summer. So I think that's the result that Planned Parenthood and their allies and their political patrons like Kamala Harris were always so terrified of, and that has now come to pass. They couldn't stop it. But they really tried. They've tried very hard to silence me, to silence my team, to intimidate people. And at the end of the day, you know, all the king's horses and all the king's men still couldn't do it. The truth is getting out there. Too many people know. Too many people are following up on the investigative research and on the public records requests and everything else. So at the end of the day, I think we have a lot to be thankful for, and we have a lot to. I think we have a lot of work ahead of us. But I think that this issue is still crucial for having a robust and clarifying and impactful public conversation about abortion policy.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kristen, can you do us a favor and just read what the sign behind you says?
Yes, it says, if they're not babies, then why is UCSF harvesting their organs?
Yeah, I think that perfectly encapsulates what we're talking about here, which is why I think that for me, why I think that it's so important to focus on this issue as pro-lifers, for people, regardless of what community they're in, because I know in San Francisco, this is a huge practice. Here in Pittsburgh, it is as well. We can talk a little bit about the really horrifying experiments that are going on here in my home city a little later. But even if this isn't happening in your community, which it likely is, and I encourage you to file some FOIA requests and try to figure out what institutions might be doing this. But even if it's not happening in your community, it is such an important thing to be able to point to as a pro-life person. That question that David just spoke about, and that your sign perfectly says, if they're not human, why does it help to test on their organs, to do research with them? And so I think that for me, as a pro-life person, I guess that's so obvious. But how have you found the response to that in somewhere like San Francisco that no one thinks of as a pro-life haven? What do your community members? How do they respond to that?
I usually have two responses that I get most often from people who consider themselves pro-choice. It's largely disbelief. I've been at protests before. Robert's been there. When I'm telling them, hey, UCSF is doing this, they're like, no, they're not. You're some conspiracy theorist. And of course I sound like a conspiracy theorist because it's only something that somebody with such a deep level of cruelty could do that would sound false. And so there's definitely a level of disbelief, which is important for, us to understand as people who are doing outreach, because when we don't want people to disbelieve us, we make sure we have better resources to give out, better type of things so that we can give that to people. But the second response I get from pro-lifers is an unfortunate level of disgust. And I say unfortunate because while I do want them to be disgusted, it's scaring them away from the issue. And I want them to be so scared that they take action and not so scared that they run away. And I think that for a lot of people, the abortion issue itself is already gruesome enough. And so I think that, it is horrific and that is sad. But at the same time, we really need people to step up and fight hard for it. I mean, I think what David said about it being paradoxical is 100% true, because we see these abortion advocates calling it reproductive justice, but then they send us the records from these FOIA requests saying, today we harvested the genitals of a little baby girl and we took her uterus. And that level of hypocrisy makes it clear to even pro-choice people that we need people to step up in that anger, that justified anger, and take action.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's see. We have some questions from the Q&A. Robert, what do you feel is the greatest barrier to ending fetal tissue trafficking?
The greatest barrier? Wow, that is... I actually haven't considered what might be the greatest barrier. The first thing that comes to my mind is just the overwhelming funding that these large institutions have, because the University of California, San Francisco, as a med school and scientific research institution, has worldwide reach and influence. They have, they're given grants, even like for their abortion training program, the Ryan Residency, by billionaires, the Buffetts, the Packards. It's like, that's one of the biggest things that comes to my mind. Just the overwhelming, that's the gruesome nature of the funding that they and the backers that they have.
Yeah,
but we
absolutely.
have people power. We have people power, and we need people to come out and join us, because that's the only thing that can topple such a large monster of a system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think pointing to the funding is is key. And I also think that the funding itself for many Americans can just be a jumping off point to start caring about it. Unfortunately, many people will be blind to injustice or comfortable with injustice, but when they realize they're paying for it, that can be a little bit more jarring, and hopefully spur them to action. I think that, as I mentioned in David's bio, that one of the key things that his investigation led to was a defunding of state taxpayer dollars towards Planned Parenthood. But of course, we know that the NIH, as well as individual states and other institutions, are funding these organizations and institutions to do this research. So David, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts about the public funding aspect of this.
Yeah, definitely. A couple of different things. And if I could actually just touch on some of what Robert just said as well. I think that I think what Robert said is absolutely correct. And I would just also add, I think there are two other barriers that we should consider and that we should be aware of. One barrier is I guess you would call it the apathy of government officials. And I've often talked about this as sort of the Kermit Gosnell problem, where if you remember the grand jury report in the Kermit Gosnell case that led to Gosnell's arrest and indictment and ultimate conviction, the grand jury in the Kermit Gosnell case said, was trying to answer the question, how was it that he was able to do such horrific things to women and children in the state of Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, in a first world country, in a modern liberal democracy, in a place where, people have, nice families and nice homes and drive nice cars and are well-to-do. And for 17 years, Gosnell was able to continue to operate. And the Pennsylvania grand jury said, well, we think that the reason that no one acted is because the victims were infants without identities. The additional victims were women who were poor and of color and marginalized, and they said, and the final reason is that the subject matter was the political football of abortion. That's what the grand jury report said in Pennsylvania. They went on to describe a little more darkly how the pro-abortion policies of the Pennsylvania government for many years enabled Kermit Gosnell by looking the other way, wanting to try, basically, being so ideologically committed to protecting industrial scale state funded abortion in Pennsylvania that they enabled absolute criminals like Kermit Gosnell. So even when it's not as extreme as in the Kermit Gosnell case, I think there's a lot to be said for sort of official apathy or government official apathy. People who are either just not paying attention, asleep at the wheel, prosecutors who are cowardly and don't want to bring these cases, or who just don't know enough about sort of the mystifying, horrifying aspects of the abortion industrial complex that they're sort of at a loss of how to begin to put the case together. So I'm not the first person to remark on the fact that the district attorney of Orange County, California, in Southern California, was able to bring a case and shut down multiple of Planned Parenthood's baby parts companies in Southern California. When at the same time, for almost 5 years, the United States Department of Justice was not able to do the same thing. So, and unfortunately, that case in Southern California is kind of the exception that proves the rule, that there's a lot of government apathy and official, apathy, I think, when it comes to oversight on these issues. I don't want to be too critical of anybody who might be listening either, but maybe it's important. We've been talking about a lot of horrific stuff in the news over the past year or two about the fetal experimentation that has been happening at the University of Pittsburgh for decades. The pro-life majorities in the Pennsylvania legislature have known about this for years. Why haven't they issued a single subpoena to the University of Pittsburgh for the past 2 years? They have the authority to do that. If they wanted to get to the truth and they wanted to honor the deeply felt beliefs and complaints of their constituents, I think they would do that. They would haul in Pitt under oath and Planned Parenthood, and they would make them testify to these specific details, and they would pull the documents out of them with subpoenas in order to hold them accountable and verify the information that they're being given. That hasn't been done yet, and I think that's apathy, and I think that should change. The other barrier that I see is it's actually the barrier of continued legalized abortion. So long as industrial scale, state-funded child killing through the institution of legalized abortion is a thing in our country, that makes an entire class of human beings, our brothers and sisters in the womb, it makes them less than human, and so it makes them vulnerable for the kind of exploitation that you see in fetal tissue harvesting and trafficking. And so we can try and separate the issues, and people can try to have sort of clean and nice abortion, but at the end of the day, the practice of abortion is built on the dehumanization of children in the womb, and so once that starts, then it really is a very fast, slippery slope to treating them like commodities and buying and selling them and buying and selling their body parts. And that just gets back to the that is sort of the answer to the paradox of the body parts are only valuable to sell and experiment on because they're human beings just like us, and so we're not going to be able to totally eradicate the experimentation and the trafficking until we start really treating them like human beings just like us. And so you see that there was a lot of fetal experimentation going on in some states like Texas. And Utah and elsewhere. And after the Dobbs decision, abortion is no longer a thing in Texas, and neither is fetal experimentation. The same would be true in Utah, except the Utah law has been held up a little bit in litigation. And the same should be true in a state like Michigan, right? But the Michigan law has been held up in litigation, and so fetal experimentation continues in Michigan, and it certainly continues in California and in New York. So I'm sorry to take a little detour there, Herb. Can you remind me what your question was that you just asked me, and I can answer it. The funding, right? We were talking about the funding issue. So the funding is a big issue as well, because there have been really powerful government interests involved in sponsoring the market for aborted fetal organs for experimentation for decades. And this goes back even into the 1960s. It traces its way through some of these major publicly funded research universities across the country: University of Pittsburgh, UCSF, UC San Diego, for a long time Baylor College of Medicine, and then there's also the private sector interest and involvement as well, investment in having an easy sort of low liability supply of raw human biological material, because you can experiment, at will on a bunch of aborted fetal livers to do your drug testing or whatever else, and there's no living human being who's going to come and sue you for a side effect. So there's been a lot of powerful financial interests, both state funded and private, who are heavily invested in being able to commodify children in the womb.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Kristen, I was going to that leads perfectly into this, because I was going to ask you about some of those private interests that David mentioned. I'm familiar with, for-profit corporations like ABR and some others that have they exist to continue this killing and these practices. Can you tell us a little bit about what that landscape looks like, and maybe what you've done so far to try to combat it?
I think actually this might be a better question for Robert, but like he said, we have some stuff on our website about private people who have been funding, fetal tissue research and organ harvesting and trafficking, and that's definitely a huge issue. I think in terms of our goals as an organization, we've been focusing a lot on just UCSF as an institution. And while we are fighting, organ trafficking as a larger issue, I think that's kind of been our main focus. my work with POW obviously does involve fighting the private interest within the abortion industrial complex, which is part of this issue. And so I would say, our main goal right now in terms of the private funding and support of these practices has been mostly just about raising awareness. And, there have been protests in the past about people who have been privately interested in it. And it's definitely something we want to focus more on. But that's kind of the landscape of where we are right now on that. And really, in the past couple months, we've been trying to not create a narrative, but create a clearer narrative about what's going on. And so really, we've been focusing on the Chancellor of UCSF and trying to create a narrative that shows that he understands they're human beings and that he's intentionally killing them, knowing that they're going to harvest their organs, or he's supporting that. And so in terms of private people who are supporting it, obviously there's billionaires who support it. There's lots about that on our website. But our main kind of thing for the past couple months has been Sam Hawgood. And we've even there's one woman that we met who's actually worked under Sam Hawgood at UCSF. She did a residency with him. Her name's Victoria Schneider, and she's a pediatrician. And she said she literally saw him save the lives of 24-week children. And then at the same time, he's supporting killing children of the exact same age. And so I think, while there are a lot of private interests involved, we've been focusing on really shaping a public institutional narrative about what's going on and fighting that in our local level. And maybe Robert wants to add something on about that, about more private funding and things like that.
Sure, please, Robert.
Yeah, could you repeat your question?
Yeah, just tell me a little bit more about the private interest. I know a lot about the the NIH funding of many of these research institutions, but I also know that there are for-profit companies basically wholly dedicated, not just Planned Parenthood, but institutions like ABR and some others that really prop this up as an industry outside of and as a part of the wider abortion industrial complex.
Right. So when you look at the published studies from medical journals written by UCSF researchers, you'll notice them mentioning the sources of the fetal tissue, the aborted remains. You'll see them mention San Francisco General Hospital, which is one of UCSF's medical centers in the city of San Francisco. It's a training hospital for abortion. They collect the body parts from there. But also some of the journals, the articles mention companies such as Advanced Bioscience Resources across the bay in Alameda. They'll mention, there have been some Stanford researchers publishing that they got the body parts from STEM Express. And we've been linking those studies on our website so people can see more, can see directly firsthand all the institutions that are involved in this. Also in the same section where you notice it, the studies mentioned grant funding from the National Institutes of Health. Sometimes they'll mention other entities. There's been so much to track down that we haven't been focusing so much on, getting a full list or doing full investigation as of yet towards those private entities that aren't government institutions that are, putting money in the pockets of these researchers to continue targeting unborn children. But I'm sure that's something that we will be doing. And with Advanced Bioscience Resources, we have just last fall organized a major protest, including a roadblock in their community. And it was just very exciting to see people come together and, just feel that, we have this such a strength in coming together to be able to make a scene and be able to get more eyes on this issue.
Great, thank you. Before we go forward, I see some discussion in the chat, and I do just want to clear one thing up. I see some people talking about vaccines, which are relevant to the question of fetal tissue research. But I want to clarify, because I think that there is some confusion, and I think this issue has a lot of confusion in general, not just among the wider public, but also in the pro-life community. Kristen, can you explain a little bit about the difference between what we're talking about when I say fetal tissue research and trafficking compared to fetal cell lines used in research? They both are in my opinion, ethically dubious. But they're sort of different, especially when it comes to the current practices and legislation involving them. So, Kristen.
Yes. I think a good way to do this is by giving a specific example. So some of the research that we have found about what UCSF is doing specifically is harvesting genitals from children, specifically to learn about the reproductive system, to learn about UTIs and different types of things like that. So while vaccines are kind of relevant because they are talking about, using cells and using tissues, biological tissues from fetuses, when it comes to organ harvesting, a lot of it has to do more with testing on either an animal or on a human animal so that they can get a cure for something. Like, I know there's been research being done on like AIDS and HIV and things that are really important to find cures for, but they're doing it in an unethical manner. And they obviously need these organs and body parts because it's easier to see what the results of these will be on humans and even whole human specimens than, a non-human animal specimen. And so when we talk about the difference there, I mean, the cell lines, it's a different type of thing because they're either using the organs to humanize a non-human animal, or they're using the organs just in general to test it directly.
Mm-hmm. And if I can add on something, so I'd say that everyone in the pro-life movement across the board agrees that the targeting of a parent and the unborn child before the abortion appointment happens is egregious at any point in history, whether that was decades ago or current, targeting
Absolutely.
that family. When we mention certain vaccines out there, such as some of the COVID vaccines, and I think the chickenpox vaccine as well, there's a small handful of cell lines that are basically, you can picture it like a petri dish of replicated cells that have been like dividing, splitting, replacing themselves for decades. And the original cells that no longer exist were harvested unethically from a child. And there's difference of opinion on whether there's, something ethically, problematic about using those descendant cells from that petri dish that's, just sitting on the shelf. And I definitely welcome, that discussion and debate. But like the more egregious thing that I think everyone might be able to say, is clearly more egregious is, instead of reaching up to the shelf to grab that petri dish, is going to an abortion facility, saying, like, knocking on the door saying, hey, that aborted baby that you said we would have by this time, are they dead yet? Can I collect their tissues? Can I do that dissection now? That is much more of a pressing and egregious practice that is taking place that we need to get more attention on so that we can stop it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in particular, there's more information on this on Pro-Life SF's website about UCSF. But I think most horrifying in relation to that is that some of these contracts, we're talking about contracts that require a fresh supply of infant organs. I mean, we're talking about post-viability in many cases, potentially born alive children. I mean, it's really horrific. And not only is it happening and people are profiting off of, but Robert, sort of as you described, it's created a market for it, where people are expecting, a dependency on later abortion. And I think that most people are horrified by that, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, when we're talking about these advanced gestational ages. And particularly, Kristen, I'd love to hear sort of your perspective on, not just the unborn baby, but the mother in this circumstance. In many cases, we don't exactly know what their consent forms say. And some we have been able to get the records for, but I'm confident that no woman has signed consent saying, I'm comfortable if you take the skin of my child off of their scalp and graft it onto a rat, which is what they were doing at the University of Pittsburgh when I was a student there, which is incredibly horrific to think about. But we just know that, there's no informed consent here, despite what the abortion industry claims. So I would just love to hear, Kristen, your perspective on this as a feminist.
Yeah, there have been some particularly egregious contracts, which David actually had brought up in some litigation that had happened, and I know that there was a lot of concern about the legality or the consent of whether someone could consent with the way that the consent forms are written. And we definitely take issue with UCSF's consent forms because they are basically trying to incentivize people to allow them to take their children's body parts by putting in this language that, there will be a societal benefit if you donate these organs from your child. And of course, they're not going to say the specificity of it. They operate, in secrecy on purpose. They're not going to say, yeah, we're going to steal the uterus of your baby girl. They're going to say, if you choose to donate the tissues, the pregnancy tissue from your abortion procedure, you may be able to help us find a cure for something really important like HIV or AIDS. And then basically it's coercion. They're telling them that there will be a societal benefit if they allow them to take the body of their dead child. And there's a huge question there about whether informed consent can exist. And like you said, as a feminist, I find that really problematic because obviously we know the majority of abortions are done under some type of societal coercion financially, and in many cases done under the coercion or threat of violence by somebody's partner. And so this is just an additional act of coercion when there may already be existing coercion, because some of these study designs that we've seen, some of these contracts have actually said explicitly that the body parts of these children must come from children who are pristine. In other words, they have to come from a healthy parent. The child has to have no abnormalities, and they have to be, at a certain gestational age. And so we know that when abortions happen in those scenarios, there may be some form of coercion going on beyond what goes on in an earlier stage of pregnancy. And so it's particularly concerning when it comes to informed consent. And I think that really speaks to what organ trafficking is as a whole, because they don't care about consent. They don't care about whether or not a child wants their organs ripped out of them. And in this last month, when we went and spoke at the ethics board for the UC system, one of our volunteers, Tim, who is part of the group Survivors, he was talking about, there's a huge difference between me on my ID saying that I want to be an organ donor and a child being killed and their organs intentionally taken without their consent. There's a huge difference between that. And I think their lack of care for consent there is completely indicative of their lack of care for consent for people who are actually going through these procedures.
Absolutely. Thank you. Moving on to a question from the chat, I see, how do we combat the claim that this is life-saving science when trying to discuss ending fetal tissue research? Robert or David, do you have a response to that?
Sure, I can go first. I mean, so some of this is really, it's actually that's a very stale, it's a very stale excuse that kind of dates back to the controversy over embryonic stem cell research from back in the mid-aughts, the mid-2000s. There are no commercially available cures or therapies that use either embryonic stem cells or aborted fetal stem cells to heal and cure you. All of the most successful stem cell type therapies and cell-based therapies that exist and that are available to actual patients in an actual clinical setting involve using adult stem cells and typically involve using the adult stem cells from the actual patient themselves, which is much better, right? Because that way you have no foreign material going into the patient's body, no risk of rejection. You have a much less risk of any kind of tumorigenesis or anything like that happening. And it's honestly, it's much easier too to get the stem cells out of an adult person's brown adipose tissue or body fat than it is to try to match it from like that just one particular perfect fetus. So no, most of the what I would call the market pressure for the harvesting and experimental use of aborted fetal organs, it's not to heal anybody, it's not to cure anybody. It's because of financial interests from either university researchers and different research universities, taxpayer funded, who are competing for the big NIH grant money and competing for different kinds of grant money. And so they're all trying to differentiate their research from another team's research at another university. And so they can say, oh, well, we're going to do this extra little thing with this piece of fetal tissue instead of doing it that way. And so it's really just, it's a very artificial advertising kind of pressure that is exaggerated and inflated in order to keep pace in the competition for grant funding. And then you see a similar thing in the private sector, in the big pharma R&D, research and development departments and sectors, where some of it has to do with patent applications and the competition between different patents and needing to differentiate your methodology, your drug testing screening, your proprietary methods just enough from somebody else's patented one so that you don't get sued over the patent thing and you can capitalize on it first. Similarly for wanting a large, convenient, relatively liability-free source of raw human biological material that you can run your drug assays on and other kinds of testing and stuff like that. So it's not leading to earth-shattering, life-changing cures. All it is it's basically it's a way for both taxpayer-funded universities and big for-profit corporations to put profits over people, to try to cut corners and find an easy, convenient way for them to keep their expenses low and their profit margins high, as they try to capitalize on drug discovery and R&D, and feeding off of the public dime.
Yeah, and that's actually a specific example UCSF has given us in the past. There have been times when we have tried to get public records for them, and they specifically said, we can't give you these records because of the highly competitive nature of our field. And so 100%, it's about university competition and grant funding and all sorts of stuff like that.
Thank you. Another question from the chat, this from Sarah Turzo. She just wants to know, is there a website where you can share some of these documents and facts about fetal tissue research in Pennsylvania and in San Francisco? Where can I go to learn more? So I just want to give all of you the opportunity quickly to get those websites out now while everyone is still paying attention.
Yes.
Yep.
So our website, prolifesf.com or prolifesf.org, you can go to either. You can go, and under our campaigns, we have our UCSF campaign that lists out, what UCSF is doing and why we oppose it. And we also have linked all of the public records we've received from UCSF there. So it'll show all of the, the researchers saying, today I went here and I collected these organs. And then additionally, we have an event coming up that's linked on our website. We're actually doing a week of action in San Francisco during November to oppose fetal tissue research and organ harvesting and trafficking. And so we're going to be having a lot of information around that in person, but please do go to our website. We have a mini documentary linked there talking about the specifics of what UCSF does. And we also recently started a podcast with a group called Survivors, and our first episode is 101 about what is fetal tissue research. So I highly recommend that. It's linked on our website.
Great, thank you. David?
Sure. If you go to centerformedicalprogress.org or cmp.org, you can find all of our latest investigative reporting about the fetal trafficking and fetal experimentation at the University of Pittsburgh. We have quite a few fact sheets and different special reports that we've put up over the years about advanced bioscience resources, about the use of illegal partial birth abortions within the fetal tissue harvesting space, as well as we even have, from the original undercover video reporting series release, we have some basic we have a set of basic fact sheets about some of these different issues, a glossary of terms, and of course all of the original undercover video reporting is available there as well at centerformedicalprogress.org.
Great.
Robert, links, yours are the same as Kristen, I assume?
Exactly the same. So just
Great.
to add on a little extra, just so all of these resources will help people to see both just the egregious nature of the publicly acknowledged practices of these institutions, as well as the exposing the opportunity and motive for criminal activity to take place in these arenas as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so important when you're talking about this. Someone mentioned that that they feel as though that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about seems like a conspiracy theory, or that it's been delegitimized was the word they used, because it has just been denied over and over again, and people have believed the abortion industry, and or at least people have believed the abortion industry in what they say to the media, but they don't believe the abortion industry in what they say in their own reports, that are publicly available. And so I tell people when I'm talking about this, don't believe me. Don't believe an anti-abortion extremist like Kristen Turner or David Daleiden or Robert Byrd. Like, why would you believe me? I understand you should be skeptical. We are anti-abortion. Go and look at what the actual institutions themselves are saying, because Pro-Life SF, Rehumanize, Center for Medical Progress, we're all just citing to their own reports that they publish. And so I think for a lot of us, it can feel, you feel like you're going crazy, like this is a conspiracy theory, because I think Kristen used the word diabolical. It could only be, some sort of made up conspiracy theory, because it is so horrifying to think that the reality is that there simply is a conspiracy between the abortion industry, these universities, the NIH, and other private and public institutions to kill and experiment and sell the body parts of these unborn children. And so please, I encourage everyone to do their own research on this, to start at the websites that Kristen, Robert, and David have given you, but to really look into it and look into your own institutions. Because as I said, I was going to the University of Pittsburgh while some of these experiments were going on. It could have been my classmates. It could have been my professors in my science classes who were involved in this type of research. And I would have no idea, because it is just not talked about publicly, and certainly not by the mainstream media. So I encourage you to do your own research. We are almost out of time, so I do just want to give each of our panelists, first of all, a thank you, and then an opportunity to share any parting thoughts, wisdom. Ideally, it would be great if you could share something hopeful, because this has been quite the bummer of a session. So I would really appreciate anything hopeful that you're able to share. Robert, how about you first? Okay, you'll go last, because we can guarantee you'll have some hope.
Cool.
Let's see. I would prefer to throw it to Kristen, so maybe we can go to David first.
All right, sure. I can go first. So parting thoughts. We've talked a lot this evening about how fetal organ harvesting and fetus trafficking is the commodification of our brothers and sisters in the womb, right? And I think it's important just to underscore and emphasize how viscerally real that is. It's not just because somebody is putting a price tag on another little human being's brain or another little human being's heart, although that is that is its own kind of horror. But the commodification is even more extreme, because just take, for example, a company like Advanced Bioscience Resources or STEM Express that exists as a harvesting company that is going into a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic at 8 o'clock in the morning when there are 15 to 25 pregnant patients who are scheduled for their abortions that day, some of whom have been staying up late at night crying, aren't final on their decision. The decision isn't final. The life or death decision about whether or not to abort that baby is not final until she's on the operating table and the abortion has actually been done. And so up until that moment, this is a life or death decision that is very intimate, that people are struggling with. And yet from 8 o'clock in the morning, these for-profit companies, major taxpayer-funded research universities, others are also coming into that same abortion clinic with an agenda and with an order list and a quota of the number of abortions for the number of body parts that they are going to have to fulfill for that day. So the particular, not just the particular, but the one of the most pressing problems of the commodification and the dehumanization in fetal trafficking is that it creates incentives for more abortions to happen that would not otherwise, and to lock in specific abortions to happen so that there is no more choice. It's basically the old idea that if you say as your excuse, quote unquote, they're just going to die anyway, then you're basically creating a mandate that they have to die, and there's nothing that we're going to do. There's nothing that we're going to do to try to stop that. So that's the I think that is the greatest horror of fetal experimentation and fetal trafficking, and why we have to emphasize it, and we have to highlight it, and we have to expose it, and we have to stop it. In terms of what I think we should all be hopeful for is, again, the information has been out there. The information has been out there, more high profile, with more reporting, with more investigations, with more people looking into it than ever before. And too many people know now. Too many people have seen the contracts that Planned Parenthood has, where they sell the usable body parts for a particular specimen price for each body part. Too many people have seen the published research coming out of the University of Pittsburgh about their live fetal experimentation. Too many people too many congressional offices have subpoenaed and investigated this information and stored the documents and maintained them. This stuff is out there. The light is breaking through. The cracks are appearing. The stronghold of Roe versus Wade has fallen. The contract with death at the highest levels of our government has been broken. So there's a lot to celebrate, and there's a lot to be hopeful about. There's a lot more work to do. But I mean, just, again, keep in mind, me and some of my team are still being prosecuted in California for exposing this stuff, because that's how afraid Planned Parenthood and their allies were about it. And yet, even in Southern California, some of their baby parts companies were shut down by local law enforcement and had to admit that, yeah, it's all true. They were illegally trafficking aborted fetuses from Planned Parenthood. So there's a lot to be hopeful about. There are a lot of good reasons to be a very happy warrior right now. So I think that would just be my closing message to everyone. Let's stay faithful. Let's continue the work. Let's especially in the post-Dobbs era, let's let the whole world know that we have a better way. And that the pro-life message is that at the end of the day, no matter your circumstances, no matter where you come from, no matter how difficult it is, we embrace and welcome the imperfection and the beauty inherent in every single human life. That's a message that every single person needs, and none of us can thrive without it. And that's what we're here to do. So I'm really happy and really thankful to be doing that with all of you guys here. And I'm looking forward to the future.
Thank you, David.
Cool. Yeah, I think I have two major things. One, you can take action even if you can't leave your house. So like I said, we're doing a week of action in November, and there's both in-person and remote participation. So please go to our website and go into that, because you can literally spend like 5 to 10 minutes on this and make a difference, make a notable difference. So that's something you can do. But also, I just wanted to let people know that Pro-Life San Francisco is not only doing this activism, we want to be a resource for people. Robert knows how to file FOIA requests. We have like tangible things we can help people with, and we're ready to do that. And we're mobilizing more people who are more passionate every single day. And I just want you guys to know that the small amount of time that you may be able to dedicate to this does make a difference, and that we are here to help people of all communities all over the U.S. and even in other countries get fetal tissue research off the table.
Wonderful. Thank all of you so much. Robert, do you have any parting thoughts, or are you going to defer to Kristen?
Well, I'll just say, this is a fight that's well worth the time and emotional energy. Also, we understand that, all of us are only human. We can't be looking into this darkness for prolonged periods of time without the necessary self-care. So we know that that's important. We're keeping it all in mind, getting the work done, keeping, self-care is a priority as well. So, to join this fight doesn't mean you have to just wreck yourself emotionally. We're going to be all in this, together alongside each other and supporting each other in every way that we can.
Yeah. And I'll also say not just self-care, but also community care. I know that the people on this call even have probably seen me cry, and I've seen several of you cry over this issue and over, other instances of really extremist pro-abortion or abortion violence. And so I think that we all need to remember, I'm sorry that we're ending our conference on really such a heavy and disturbing topic, but everything we talk about at a Rehumanize conference tends to be heavy and disturbing because that's the world we live in. So I'm very grateful to everyone, especially all of you who have been here since the morning and have been engaging on these issues. I hope that many of you did attend some of those sessions we had earlier with meditation and self-care, but I cannot emphasize enough that it's not just self-care, it's also community care. Be there for each other. I know that I have been there for many of my pro-life and consistent life ethic friends, and I've only been able to do that because they have been there for me. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm so grateful to my panelists. With that, I am going to stop broadcasting for now and then say goodbye to my panelists, and then I will be back on for the closing remarks with the rest of the Rehumanize team. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a few minutes.